Hello everyone. Tonight I want to take you into a mystery that feels almost impossible to believe. A story that begins like a strange rumor whispered in the wind, and then grows darker the deeper you step inside. Imagine hearing about a place that once existed. A town filled with people, families, children, workers, laughter, and ordinary life. And then one day that town simply stopped existing. Not destroyed, not burned down, not swallowed by the earth, but vanished, as if every trace of human presence had been erased overnight. What would you think if someone told you such a thing was real? Would you laugh, shake your head, and dismiss it as a ghost tale? Or would you lean closer and wonder what could possibly have caused such a mystery? Tonight, I will tell you about the Vanishing Village, a place that disappeared overnight, and why even now, after decades of stories, questions, and investigations, no one has been able to find an answer. It begins with an old logging settlement tucked away deep inside the northern wilderness. In the early 1900s, before satellites mapped every corner of the world, before highways carved through the most remote forests, there were towns so isolated they seemed almost forgotten. This village, which some records call Deren Hollow, was one such place. It had maybe 36 families living there, people who worked with wood, trapping, and small farming. They weren't wealthy, but they weren't poor either. They were self-sufficient, and because the world outside seemed so far away, they relied on each other for survival. The village had its own small schoolhouse, a church with a crooked bell tower, and a single road that wound through the trees until it faded into dirt. Traders came once every few months with supplies, and that was the only contact these people had with the outside world. For years, life was steady. Then one autumn morning, when a trader returned to bring goods, he found something strange. He stepped into the village square, expecting to see children playing, women tending fires, and men hauling wood. But the place was silent, completely silent. He walked past the schoolhouse where the blackboard still had chalk writing on it, as if the teacher had left in the middle of a lesson. He looked into homes and saw food left on tables, clothing hanging on lines, and candles that had burned down to stubs. But there were no people, not one. Every man, woman, and child who lived in Deren Hollow had vanished. The trader panicked. At first, he thought maybe the villagers had gone on a hunt or moved to higher ground, but the silence was too complete. Horses were still tied to posts, chickens still roamed the dirt roads, and yet not a single soul was around to care for them. The trader ran back to the nearest town and reported what he had seen. Authorities came to investigate, and what they found only deepened the mystery. There were no signs of struggle, no blood, no broken doors, no footprints leading away into the forest. The possessions of the villagers, from tools to personal belongings, remained in place. Even the valuables, coins, jewelry, anything that would normally be stolen, were untouched. It looked as though the entire population had simply stood up in the middle of their daily lives and walked into thin air. Rumors spread quickly. Some said the villagers had been taken by raiders or hidden enemies, but no tracks suggested that. Others whispered of an epidemic, but there were no bodies, no signs of disease, and no graves. The most chilling possibility people spoke about was that the village had been taken by something not of this world. Years later, when newspapers dug into the story, they uncovered odd reports from travelers and hunters who had passed near Deren Hollow in the weeks before the disappearance. Strange lights in the forest, low humming sounds at night, and an unusual fog that lingered even when the air was clear elsewhere. One hunter swore he saw figures moving between the trees, tall and thin, with glowing eyes, watching the village from a distance. He laughed it off when telling others, but after the disappearance no one laughed anymore, and here is where the mystery grows darker. When the authorities searched deeper into the forest, hoping to find some sign of where the people had gone, they stumbled upon something terrifying. A clearing not far from the village had markings burned into the ground, circles within circles, and strange symbols that no one could recognize. The earth looked scorched, yet no fire had spread around it. Whatever had caused the shapes was deliberate and precise. Some investigators said it looked like ritual work, as if the villagers had performed some ceremony and then vanished. Others feared it was the work of outsiders who had come to take them away. But the symbols were never decoded. The search lasted weeks, but no answers came. Winter closed in, and the officials eventually gave up, marking Deren Hollow as abandoned. Slowly, nature began to reclaim the place. Trees bent over the houses, vines crawled up the walls, and soon the village became another forgotten ruin. But the legend of what happened there refused to fade. Now, here's the unsettling part. Decades later, when explorers and curious wanderers went back to the site, they reported something odd. They claimed the air around the abandoned homes felt heavy, as if pressing down on their chests. Some said they heard faint laughter, children's voices in the wind, and even the sound of footsteps following them. A few reported glimpses of shadows darting between buildings, though no one else was there. One explorer even described finding an old diary in the schoolhouse. The pages were yellowed and nearly unreadable, but a few entries stood out. The teacher had written about the children being restless, speaking of dreams where someone was calling them from the woods. Night after night, more of the children said they heard whispers outside their windows, a voice promising them freedom, play, and light. The teacher thought it was imagination, but the last entry was chilling. It read, "The children say tonight is the night. They are waiting for us." That was the final line. The next morning, the village was gone. So, what could have caused this? Historians, paranormal researchers, and conspiracy theorists all have their own answers. Some believe the villagers were victims of mass abduction, taken by beings beyond this world. Others think they walked willingly into the forest, drawn by some strange influence, a sound, a voice, or a force that human minds cannot resist. There are also those who argue it was government experimentation, a hidden project in the wilderness that needed test subjects, and the villagers were chosen because of their isolation. No matter which theory you lean toward, none explain why not a single body was ever found, nor why their possessions remained untouched. The mystery of Deren Hollow didn't end there. In later years, campers and hunters who unknowingly set up near the ruins sometimes vanished as well. Small cases, often dismissed as accidents, but always in the same area. Their belongings would be found, their fires still burning, but no trace of them. Just like the villagers. The legend grew until people stopped going near that part of the forest altogether. Even now, if you travel deep enough into the northern woods, some locals will warn you. They'll say the forest keeps what it takes, that voices call out to the lonely, and that once you hear them, you will follow, whether you want to or not. They say Deren Hollow was just the first, and that more places could vanish the same way, swallowed by whatever presence lives in those trees. This, my friends, is only the beginning of the story. Because what investigators uncovered years later, when a new team entered the ruins with modern equipment, may prove that the mystery of the Vanishing Village is far more complex and far more terrifying than anyone could have imagined. The team that returned to Deren Hollow decades later was not made of traders or frightened locals. They were researchers, paranormal investigators, and historians who had read the rumors and wanted to uncover the truth. By this time, technology had advanced, and they carried with them equipment for sound detection, thermal imaging, and ground-penetrating radar. To them, the story of the Vanishing Village was not just folklore. It was a puzzle, and they intended to solve it. When they first stepped into the overgrown ruins, they noticed immediately how strange the silence felt. Even in abandoned places, you can normally hear birds, insects, the wind through trees. Here, however, the air was still. It was as if the forest itself was holding its breath. Their instruments picked up faint electromagnetic disturbances, the kind that shouldn't exist so far from power lines or machines. Static hissed through their audio recorders. One investigator joked that maybe the villagers were trying to speak through the static, but no one laughed for long. They divided into teams and began documenting what remained of the homes. Most were decayed, roofs collapsed, walls leaning. Yet in some houses, objects seemed strangely preserved. A chair still standing upright, a cracked teacup on a table as though waiting for someone to return. In the schoolhouse, the blackboard still bore faint chalk marks. And then came the first strange discovery. On the floor of one house, beneath the debris, they uncovered markings almost identical to the scorched symbols found years earlier in the forest clearing. Circles carved into the wood, symbols overlapping in a way no one recognized. These had been inside the home, hidden from plain sight. Had the villagers been practicing something in secret, or had someone else placed these there? That night, when the team camped inside the ruins, they experienced what every legend had warned about. Around midnight, one of their recorders picked up whispers. At first, it was just static, then clear as water, a child's voice humming a tune. The sound chilled them to the bone. They checked their surroundings, thinking perhaps it was an echo or a trick of the wind, but there was no one there. Soon after, 2 members of the team swore they saw lights moving in the trees, pale orbs that drifted silently and disappeared when approached. The leader of the group urged them to stay calm, reminding them that psychological suggestion was powerful. They had come expecting something strange, so their minds might be playing tricks. But when morning came, one of the team members was gone. His sleeping bag was empty, his gear untouched, and there were no footprints leading away from camp. The others panicked, searching every corner of the ruins, calling his name, but he had vanished, just like the villagers before him. The remaining investigators were shaken, but they refused to leave. They believed they were close to something, and leaving would mean abandoning their evidence. They continued their search and soon uncovered something buried beneath the schoolhouse. Using ground-penetrating radar, they detected a hollow space under the foundation. With effort, they broke through and found a stone chamber that none of the original accounts had ever mentioned. Inside the chamber were walls covered in carvings, symbols identical to the ones burned into the ground outside. At the center stood a crude altar, blackened by fire. Around it were fragments of objects, some wood, some bone, and some metal. What terrified them most was that the bones were not from animals, they were human. The chamber seemed to tell a story. The carvings depicted figures standing around a circle, raising their hands to a towering shadow with eyes that blazed like fire. The shadow loomed above them, reaching down as if claiming them. It wasn't just one panel. The entire chamber was filled with these repeating images. The implication was horrifying. The villagers may have been involved in rituals, willingly or unwillingly, that summoned something into their world. That night, as they studied the chamber, the investigators heard the voices again. Louder this time, not just whispers but cries, chants, and laughter. The walls of the chamber seemed to vibrate with sound, though no instruments picked it up. Some of the team wanted to flee, convinced they were in danger. Others argued that they were witnessing proof of something beyond history. Then came the breaking point. A storm rolled in suddenly, though the forecast had predicted clear skies. Thunder cracked, lightning lit up the forest, and with each flash, they saw figures standing at the edge of the ruins. Dozens of them, pale shapes, frozen and watching. Their outlines were human, but their eyes glowed faintly, reflecting the lightning. When the light faded, so did the figures, but every flash revealed them closer, surrounding the ruins like a tightening circle. The investigators scrambled, grabbing their equipment, some praying aloud, others too terrified to speak. One man shouted that he heard the children's voice calling his name, urging him to join them. Before anyone could stop him, he walked straight into the darkness and disappeared. By dawn, only 3 of the team remained. They left Deren Hollow and never returned. Their testimony, recorded later, was filled with contradictions, fear, and details that no one could verify. The missing members were reported as accidents, but those who survived insisted they had been taken. So what does this mean? Was Deren Hollow truly a village swallowed by supernatural forces? Were the people victims of something they summoned themselves, or of a presence that lived in those woods long before they arrived? Some researchers believe the villagers may have encountered an ancient site, a place of rituals that predates recorded history, and in using it, they awakened what had been sleeping. Others insist this is evidence of mass abduction, that the lights, sounds, and vanishings point towards something not human at all. But here is the strangest part of all. Satellite images taken years after the last expedition showed something odd in the forest where Deren Hollow once stood. A perfect circle, darker than the surrounding trees, as though the ground itself refused to grow life. It matched the size of the village exactly. Locals today refuse to enter the circle. They say animals avoid it, and those who step inside hear voices that no one else can hear. The village is gone, its people are gone, the ruins have almost melted back into the earth. But the mystery remains, a wound in the land, a question without an answer. And perhaps that is the most unsettling truth, that some disappearances are never meant to be solved. What happened in Deren Hollow? Did an entire community walk into another world, pulled by voices only they could hear? Or were they taken by something that sees humanity as nothing more than a harvest? No one knows, maybe no one ever will, but the silence of that forest, the abandoned homes, and the voice